Hi, in this video we're going to give you an overview and demonstration of Microsoft Hyper-V for Windows Desktop. So there are a couple versions of Hyper-V. You could run this on Windows Server Editions, of course, which has all the full functionality. And then there's the desktop version, which you could run on Windows 10, Windows 11 Professional. And there is actually a way to configure it to run on Windows Home Edition if you want to look into how to do that hack, but it is possible and it works very well. Okay, so we're running this on Windows 11 Professional right now, and it's probably not enabled by default. So if you do a search for features, turn Windows features on and off, you could also get to it from Control Panel. And you want to find Hyper-V in the list here and just enable everything just to make sure you have everything covered here. And click OK. It'll do some configurations. You'll have to reboot, and then you'll have your Hyper-V Manager. And of course, your computer, processor has to support virtualization, which if it's a recent computer, it shouldn't be a problem. All right, so now we have the main Hyper-V Manager interface. This is where you manage everything. You create your VMs, manage your networking and storage and that type of thing. And up here we have the main Hyper-V Manager, and here is the local host. So this is the computer that is running Hyper-V, Windows 11. And you could connect to another computer if you want, somewhere else. And then we have our virtual machine list. So obviously when you first configure it, this will be empty. And then you have checkpoints under here, which are another name for snapshots. Then you have some details, summary information, memory information, networking, like so. And on the right, you have your actions. So creating virtual machines, managing your network, managing your disks, stopping the service, and then virtual machine specific settings right here as well. And you could also get to the settings by right-clicking. You'll see some of the same options here. So I'll go over the VM settings in a minute here. So if you right-click on your host name, not Hyper-V Manager, but on the host name itself, you have your Hyper-V settings. You would think it'd be under here, but it's on the host itself. So here you have your virtual hard disk default location. So I have changed mine to put it on a larger drive just for the sake of room, because you might not want everything stored on your C drive if you don't have that much room. Same for the virtual machine configuration files. So it's two different things: the virtual machine hard disk, virtual machine configuration files. And then you have options for this NUMA spanning. So this might be something you want to look into to get some more information, but it's enabled by default. Okay, then we have storage migration. So you could actually move the storage that belongs to the virtual machine to another folder or another drive while it's running actually. So simultaneous migrations, the default is 2. Enhanced session mode. So this lets you use things like attached printers and sharing other resources between your host and guest virtual machine. So this is on by default, and this has to be supported by the operating system. So if you're using a newer Windows virtual machine, shouldn't be any problem there. All right, keyboard settings. So keyboard combinations. Do you want to use them on the physical computer or virtual machine? So by default, it's set to use on the virtual machine, like Alt-Tab. But if you do Control-Alt-Delete, it's going to apply to your host computer, and I'll show you how to send that to the virtual machine in a second here. All right, then you have your mouse release key. So if you're not using the enhanced session mode, then when you have your mouse inside the virtual machine, it'll be stuck in there unless you press Control-Alt-Left arrow, and there's some other options. But for, operating systems like Windows that support it, you don't have to do it. You can just move your mouse in and out as needed. So here's the enhanced session mode that I was just talking about. So it's on by default. Then you have this option to reset checkboxes, which you could check out later if you want. Okay, so now let's check out the settings of virtual machine. We have this one running here. So let's click on settings. See, we have some other options to turn it off, shut down, pause, reset, take a checkpoint, revert, move, and so on. So for example, this shutdown option here for supported operating systems, you could actually use this to shut it down properly instead of having to go into the console and clicking on start and shut down. Okay, so let's check out the settings here. So if you need to add hardware, you could do so here. And if it's grayed out, that means it's running and you can't do it until you shut it down. So you could add a new SCSI controller to do things like attach hard drives and optical drives, network adapter, fiber channel adapter. I'm not sure if this feature will work for the Home Edition. You'll notice that HyperV desktop looks a lot like the server version, so it might have some features that are there just because they didn't take them out for the desktop version. Okay, so firmware, you could change your boot order if you want. So if you want to boot from an ISO file or DVD, you could do that and move the order up there, or network adapter, or different hard drive. Okay, security options. So for Windows 11, you're going to have a TPM, Trusted Platform Module, to run it. Otherwise, you'll get an error when you're installing it. And once again, there are ways to get around that if you know how to do it. Same with Secure Boot. And if you click on this Enable Shielding, I believe it'll just enable everything in one shot there. Okay, assigned memory. So this has 8 gigs of RAM assigned to it. So of course you want to assign memory based on how much you have on your host. So this host computer has 64 gigs of RAM. So, I could easily spare 8 gigs for this virtual machine. And then it's using dynamic memory by default. So this will kind of adjust the memory usage and only use memory as needed. So we'll allocate the memory to the virtual machine as it requires it. And then you have this memory weight. So if you have a bunch of virtual machines running, you could set a priority to specific ones so they get more memory compared to the other ones if resources are running low. Okay, then we have our processors here, how many virtual processors you want to assign to the virtual machine. You can even set reservations. And once again, you can see some of these options can't be set if the virtual machine is running. Then you have your SCSI controller here. Then if you want to attach a hard drive, DVD drive, or a shared drive, you could do so. So here are the hard drives in use on this VM. So it's on SCSI controller, the first SCSI controller, location 0. And here's the path to the hard drive. And this can't be edited because checkpoints exist for it. DVD drive using location 1. And you can see here I have an ISO file mounted in the virtual DVD drive. And then I have a secondary hard drive here as well. This was actually created from a flash drive on the host, which copied all the data over from that flash drive and created a virtual hard drive out of that flash drive. Then we have our network adapter using the default switch. So this will get you internet access, via the host, but you could also set up other kinds of networks, such as an external virtual switch, private virtual switch, internal virtual switch. So these two were added after the fact because when you first install HyperV, you'll just have the default switch there. That'll be your only option here. All right, then if you want to change the name of the VM, this will just change the name in the manager. It won't rename the host in the operating system or change the name of your virtual machine files. And then going back to the integration services, you could enable or disable them as needed. So for example, the operating system shutdown, you could do that without having to do it from the host. This heartbeat option will send a heartbeat to the host from the virtual machine just to make sure that the host knows that it's still running. Okay, so checkpoints, those are like snapshots. Microsoft calls them checkpoints. So if you want to save the state of a virtual machine, such as what's going on in its memory on the hard drive, what's running, you could do that, and then you could revert back to the checkpoint if something goes wrong. So that comes in handy if you want to do some serious testing that might mess up your VM, and if something goes wrong, just revert back to the checkpoint. But one thing to keep in mind is once you make a checkpoint, let's say you make a bunch of changes, copy some files over, and then you revert back to that checkpoint, you're going to lose everything that happened since that checkpoint was made. And then you could change the checkpoint file location if you want to put it on some storage that has more room. Same with the paging file. Then you have your automatic start action. So this determines what will happen with the virtual machines when you start the host computer. So if a VM was running when the host was shut down, you could have it automatically restart. And then you have the stop action. So this determines what happens to a running VM if you shut down the host. Okay, so that's the settings for virtual machines. All right, so if you want to use a virtual machine, so this one's running, if I double click it, it'll just open the console, or same for this one here, but it's not running. I can click on start, it just opens a blank console. I click on start there as well, but this one's running, so if I double click it, you'll see it gives the option here to use remote desktop by default. So if I click on connect, then I'll have to open my remote desktop client and then connect to it that way. Or I could just connect to the console right here and use it as is. Then you have a bunch of options up here. If you want to send Control-Alt-Delete to the VM, you could do that. There's some power options here: start, turn off, shut down, save. If you want to save the state, you want to pause it, create a checkpoint, revert a checkpoint, enhance session mode, which will go back to the remote desktop, and then share it. Then you have some options up here. Go to the VM settings, similar options. Check your media. This is the ISO file that was mounted. Clipboard capturing. If you change the view to full screen mode, you want to zoom in and out, and so on. Then you have some things down here: keyboard input captured, mouse input not captured because the mouse is outside of the VM right now, and connection secured. And if you close it like this, it's not going to shut it down. It's just going to close the console. Where other platforms, such as VirtualBox, for example, if you close the console window, it's going to kill the VM itself. Okay, then over on the right here, we have some options to create new virtual machines, import a virtual machine, go back to the HyperV settings, which we saw already, Virtual Switch Manager, if you want to create a new virtual switch. So these are ones that I created. Here's the one that comes with it. You can't edit the default switch. You can remove it, but you can't change it. And then here's some other options. So if you want to do a private virtual switch, so which allows only communication between virtual machines and not with the host, so it's a good way to isolate things for testing. External virtual switch, so if you want to allow your virtual machines to get onto the external physical network, you could do that. And the default switch is an internal switch, which allows VM communication and also allows communication with the host. Okay, Virtual SAN Manager, if you want an external SAN, I don't know if this is even supported with the home version. I've never tried it, so you could give that a shot. Edit your disks if you want to do that. Let's say you want to compact it or expand it, you could do it from this option here. Inspect the disk. This will just show you information about the disk, its size and name and location. If you want to stop the HyperV service, you could do that. And then these are the same type of options you have from the other menus. All right, so let me show you the quick create real quick here. So when you do this, you have specific options of what you could quickly create here. So they have some built-in VMs here. So this Windows 10, you could just actually have it downloaded and configured, and it'll be ready to go once it's done. After you create it, there's nothing to install, but you will need a Microsoft, I think, school or business account to actually log into it. Then there's this one here. We'll download Windows and install it and get it ready to go. And you could actually log in with your Microsoft account. Actually, I think it gives you a built-in account you could use. And this is only a 30-day trial of Windows 11 Enterprise. And then you have some Ubuntu options. Then you could also do a quick create from a local installation source if you want to mount an ISO file and do it that way. But you're probably most likely going to do it from the new option. So let's kind of run through that real quick. Okay, so you click on new, you could do new hard disk, new floppy disk, and virtual machine. So we'll do virtual machine. Next, give it a name. Let's just call this test. So here's my default location, which you could change if you want to store your virtual machine somewhere else. Then you have your generations. So I would use generation 2 unless you're using an older OS. Then you could try generation 1, 32-bit operating system, for example. And once you create a virtual machine, you cannot change its generation. Assign the memory, and this is where you could use that dynamic memory where it adjusts it for you. So let's just go with the default here. Of course, you could change it. Okay, we'll stick with the default switch for internet connection. Okay, so you could create a new disk for this virtual machine, or you could attach an existing disk or add one later. It'll give the name of the virtual disk the same name as the VM itself. And let's just say 60, because this will be deleted anyways. Okay, so you could install the operating system later, install from a bootable image or network-based installation service. So let's say ISO file, that's probably the most common way to do it. Okay, let's try Windows 11. So here's the summary. And you click on Finish. It'll create the new VM. So now it's there. So if I double click it, it opens the console. Then I could click on Start. Press any key to boot from CD. and then just go through the installation like normal. Okay, I'm just going to kill this. I can't shut it down because it doesn't have Windows installed and it can't do it properly, so I'm going to have to do the turn off option. Then if I don't want the virtual machine, I could just delete it. So now it's gone. And you could also clone virtual machines as well if you want to make a copy. And you could also clone virtual machines from checkpoints. So let's say you have an older checkpoint that has the configuration you want. You could create a clone from there. All right, so that's your basic Hyper-V for Windows desktop overview. So you can see there's not a whole lot to it, but you could do some pretty cool stuff with it. And it's a great way to get into virtualization. Or if you want to eventually move on to the Windows Server Edition, this will be a great way to get started. All right, thanks for watching and be sure to subscribe.